My name is Serafina Rowe. For the first 17 years of my life, that name felt like a borrowed coat, something that didn't quite fit, handed down by people I was connected to by blood, but not by spirit. I grew up in Port Blossom, a city that clung to the misty coastline like a barnacle to a ship's hull. It was a place of salt-laced air, the mournful cry of gulls, and the persistent dampness that seeped into the old wooden houses, making them smell of history and decay. My family was much the same, old, weathered, and smelling faintly of missed opportunities and quiet resentments. My mother, Margaret, saw the world through a lens of practicality so stark it bordered on cruelty. My uncle Richard and his family mirrored her worldview, their lives a constant calculation of profit and loss. And then there was my grandfather, Silas. He was the city's opposite, a pocket of sunshine in the perpetual coastal fog. He was a retired clockmaker, a man who believed that anything worth having was worth mending. His hands, gnarled from decades of handling tiny gears and delicate springs, had taught me how to see the intricate beauty in things others deemed broken. He taught me how to listen to the whisper of the tide, how to find constellations in the city-lit sky, and how to believe that my own hands were capable of creating, not just holding what was given. Our family existed in a state of fragile truce, a quiet Cold War fought over Sunday dinners. I was a disappointment, a quiet, artistic girl who preferred the dusty chaos of my grandfather's workshop to the polished, empty rooms of my mother's house. My college fund, a modest sum of $8,400 I'd painstakingly saved for art school, was a source of constant, low-grade friction. To them, it was a frivolous expense. To me, it was an escape route. Then, one Tuesday in October, the fragile truce shattered. The call came from Port Blossom General Hospital. Silas had collapsed. A massive stroke. The specialist, a man with tired eyes and a voice devoid of warmth, laid out the facts in the sterile quiet of a family consultation room. The words hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam, stark and unavoidable. The treatment is aggressive and extraordinarily expensive. Well over $150,000. Even with it, his chances of a meaningful recovery are less than 10%. My family didn't cry. They didn't argue. There was no dramatic outcry, just a shared, silent glance that passed between my mother and uncle, a cold, transactional acknowledgement. They had done the math. The investment was poor. My mother's words were the final shovel of dirt on a grave they had already dug. "Let him go, Serafina," she said, her voice clipped and final, as if discussing a failing stock. "He's 84. He's lived a long life. We're not going to bankrupt ourselves throwing money into a black hole." And, just like that, they were gone. They stood up, smoothed their clothes, and walked out. Out of the room, out of the hospital, out of our lives. I watched their backs recede down the long, polished hallway, their footsteps echoing a finality that hollowed me out. I was 17, my world suddenly shrunk to the size of that sterile room, filled with the scent of antiseptic and the suffocating weight of their departure. I was broke, terrified, and utterly, profoundly alone. But I stayed. Because he wasn't just an old man. He was Silas. The man who taught me that a stopped clock isn't dead, it's just waiting for a patient hand. The man whose quiet belief in me was the only true home I'd ever known. I refused to let him die alone, reduced to a line item on a family ledger. What they didn't know, as they drove away to their sensible, orderly lives, was that he would live for another 7 years. And in those 7 years, I would become everything they were certain I could never be. When he finally died, peacefully at 91, they came back. Not for the man they had abandoned, but for the life he had left behind. The hallway was a tunnel of silence. I could still hear the click of my mother's sensible heels on the linoleum long after the elevator doors had chimed shut. I stood there, a ghost in the making, clutching a bundle of medical forms in one hand and my half-empty wallet in the other. My mother had been the last to leave. She hadn't hugged me, hadn't even met my eyes. She'd simply paused, her gaze sweeping over me with a cool detachment. "You can stay if you want, Serafina," she'd said, her voice flat. "But don't come to us when the money runs out. You're making your bed." Then she was gone, leaving me to lie in it. A nurse with kind, weary eyes approached me gently. Are you his granddaughter? I managed a nod, my throat a knot of unshed tears. We'll need someone to sign the financial responsibility forms, she said, her voice soft with practiced sympathy. The insurance will only cover a fraction of this level of care. Without the intervention, he likely won't make it through the week. I didn't hesitate. Not because I wasn't scared. I was petrified. The fear was a living thing, coiling in my stomach. But the thought of my grandfather waking up in this cold, sterile place, disoriented and in pain, only to find himself completely alone, was a greater terror. The image of his confused eyes searching a room empty of love was more than I could bear. I signed every form they placed in front of me. The stack of paper felt as heavy as a tombstone. Each signature felt like I was signing away a piece of my future, the future they had all expected and I had secretly dreamed of. I authorized the transfer of my art school savings, all $8,400 scraped together from summer jobs bussing tables at a fish shack on the pier and selling small watercolor paintings to tourists. It vanished with a few keystrokes from the billing department. Then I walked down to the hospital's human resources office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I begged for a job. Any job. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was in the basement kitchen, my hands raw from scrubbing industrial-sized pots. By 10 o'clock, my shift over, I was back at Silas's bedside in the ICU, the smell of bleach and dish soap still clinging to my clothes. I held his cool, unresponsive hand while the machines around us kept their steady, rhythmic vigil, beeping and humming a lullaby of life support. He didn't wake up for 3 days. 3 days of me whispering stories to him, reading from a worn copy of Moby Dick I'd found in the waiting room, and talking about the gulls outside his window. The nurses would come in and out, checking his vitals, offering me styrofoam cups of lukewarm coffee and sad, encouraging smiles. On the 4th day, his eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with confusion, his voice a dry rasp when he finally spoke. But the first thing he whispered, the very first words he formed, were, "You stayed." Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally broke free, blurring the sight of his frail form in the hospital bed. I squeezed his hand. "Always, Grandpa. Always." That night, as he drifted in and out of a medicated sleep, I sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair and stared out the window at the lights of Port Blossom. The world outside hadn't stopped. Cars streamed across the bridge, their headlights like a river of light. People were living their lives, laughing in restaurants, going home to their families. But here, in the hushed sanctity of room 3B, something inside me had irrevocably broken and, in the same moment, begun to reform. My family thought they had left me with a burden, a dying man and a mountain of debt. But what they had really left me with was time. Time to love, time to learn, time to grow into the person I was never permitted to be in their shadow. They had walked away from him. And in doing so, they had given me the freedom to walk toward myself. The doctors had given him a week, maybe 2. They spoke in terms of statistical probabilities and neurological plateaus. But a week passed, then 2, then a month. Silas's recovery wasn't a miracle, it was a testament to quiet tenacity. It began with the smallest of signs, almost imperceptible. A twitch of his fingers in my hand. A flicker of his eyelids in response to a story. The way his grip, once limp, would tighten ever so slightly when I read to him from his favorite book of poetry. I read to him every evening after my shift in the kitchen. At first, I wasn't sure if he could even hear me, but the act of filling the sterile room with the rhythm of a human voice felt like a defiance against the silence of the machines. I read him naval histories, articles from old woodworking magazines, even the back of a cereal box once, just to hear the sound of words. Then one afternoon, while I was carefully spoon-feeding him some broth, he cleared his throat. His voice was fragile, like old parchment. That author, he rasped, uses far too many adverbs. I froze, the spoon hovering midair. Grandpa? He blinked slowly, his focus sharpening on my face. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. And you've always been a terrible cook. This broth tastes like salty water. I laughed, a sound so full of relief it felt like a sob. It was the most beautiful complaint I had ever heard in my life. Over the following weeks, his recovery gained a slow, steady momentum. It was a painstaking process, measured in millimeters of progress. First, sitting up in bed with the help of a nurse. Then, speaking in longer, more coherent sentences. Finally, the day he stood on his own 2 feet, his thin frame trembling but upright, his hand gripping my arm like an anchor, that day felt like witnessing a sunrise after a long, dark night. The doctors called it a statistical anomaly. The nurses called him their star patient. I called it proof that love was a more potent medicine than any drug they could administer. We moved into a tiny, 2-room apartment on a street behind the hospital. The rent was all I could afford, and it showed. The walls were painted a dreary beige, the radiator clanged and hissed like a dying animal, and the single bathroom down the hall was shared with 2 other tenants. But the window in our small living area looked out onto a crooked maple tree, and in the mornings, the sun would filter through its leaves, casting dancing patterns on the floor. To us, it was a palace. It was ours. It was together. Our days fell into a new rhythm. During the day, I worked my shifts at the hospital and took online classes to earn my high school equivalency diploma. At night, Silas became my teacher. In our cramped kitchen, under the flickering glow of a single overhead bulb, he began to teach me. Not just mathematics or literature, but the practical magic of his old trade. How to fix things. He'd have me bring him broken items from our neighbors, a toaster that wouldn't toast, a lamp with a faulty switch, a coffee machine that gurgled pathetically. Most people throw things out when they break, he told me one evening, his steady hands guiding mine as I held a soldering iron for the first time. The smell of melting metal filled the small room. They see the flaw, the imperfection, and they decide it's easier to replace it than to understand it. But if you take the time to understand how something works, really works, you can almost always rebuild it. That goes for machines, Serafina. And it goes for people too. Those lessons, held in that small, humble kitchen, became the foundation of my new life. They weren't just about circuits and wires, they were about patience, resilience, and the profound value of choosing to repair rather than discard. They were about seeing the worth in what others had given up on. He was teaching me how to fix a toaster, but he was also teaching me how to fix myself. One evening, I was hunched over a sputtering table radio, carefully replacing a blown capacitor. Silas watched me, his expression thoughtful. He nodded, a slow, approving gesture. "You know," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "you have the mind of an engineer." I shook my head, a blush creeping up my neck. I have the mind of a dishwasher who doesn't want to eat cold soup. But secretly, I took his words and tucked them away in a safe part of my heart. It was a tiny seed of belief, planted in the barren soil of my self-doubt. It was the first time anyone, besides him, had ever suggested I could be more than the quiet, unremarkable girl my family saw. He wasn't supposed to live. But he did. And because he lived, I began to live, too, in a way I never had before. The silence from my family was absolute. In the beginning, a small, naive part of me held out hope. I thought that once Grandpa was out of the hospital, walking and talking, they might come around. I imagined a phone call, a hesitant apology, a slow mending of the ties they had so cleanly severed. The hope died a quiet death. First, the joint savings account my mother had set up for me years ago was closed without warning. Then, my phone suddenly went dead in the middle of a call. I had been cut from the family plan. The last communication I ever received was a text message from my mother, a digital slap in the face. "You made your choice, Serafina. Don't expect anything from us. Ever. No explanation. No conversation. Just a simple, clean erasure." I cried for days. I grieved not just for the family I had lost, but for the one I realized I had never truly had. It wasn't the anger that hurt the most. It was the chilling realization that they didn't even miss me. They hadn't lost a daughter or a niece. They had simply written off a bad investment. Silas saw the sorrow in my face, even when I tried to hide it behind a bright smile. He never spoke ill of them, never once uttered a bitter word. He simply sat with me one evening as I stared blankly at the wall, and said, "Some people, Serafina, only know how to love when it's easy and convenient. You're not one of those people." And that is a strength, not a weakness. Never forget that. Money became a constant, pressing worry. I took on a second job, working as a supply clerk at the hospital during the day, my shifts in the kitchen moving to the night. I studied for my GED exams in the quiet hours between mopping floors and folding laundry. There were weeks when I ate little more than toast and tea so that Silas could have fresh vegetables and fish. He hated it. He saw the growing paleness of my skin, the dark circles under my eyes. So, he made me a proposition. He would teach me everything he knew, advanced mechanics, blueprint reading, the fine art of woodworking and joinery, if I promised to start charging people for my repair work. A skill is only valuable if you value it yourself, he insisted. By the third month, we had a shoebox under his bed filled with crumpled bills, labeled Hearthwood Repairs. By the sixth month, our neighbors were knocking on our door regularly, bringing us their broken treasures, a music box that had fallen silent, a wooden chair with a wobbly leg, even a complex system of garden irrigation timers. We never advertised. We didn't have to. Word spread through the quiet network of the neighborhood. Serafina and her grandpa, they don't just fix things. They care. One night, as I was carefully reassembling the intricate inner workings of an old cuckoo clock, Silas said, "You don't need their name to build your own." I looked up confused. Whose name? He didn't answer, just smiled and went back to sanding a small piece of birchwood. But in that moment, I understood. He wasn't just teaching me to be a repairwoman. He was preparing me for a life of my own making. Not for revenge, not for spite, but for a sturdy, unshakable independence. A life that didn't require anyone else's permission to exist. That year, I earned my GED with honors. The following summer, on Silas's persistent urging, I applied for a local scholarship program aimed at women in technology and design. I almost didn't do it. The application form sat on our small kitchen table for weeks. I felt like an imposter, a kitchen porter pretending she could sit at a table with engineers. Silas saw my hesitation. He tapped the application with his finger. The people who truly belong in a room, Serafina, he said gently, are rarely the ones who were born in it. They're the ones who were brave enough to build their own door. So, I built my door. And I walked right through it. 7 years. That's how long it had been since my family had walked away. 7 years since I'd stood in that hospital corridor, my hands shaking as I signed forms that mortgaged a future I no longer had. 7 years since I had become, in their eyes, the girl who stayed behind. And in those 7 years, I had become someone else entirely. I had become Serafina Rowe, not just a name but a reputation. Not just the girl with the soldering iron and dishpan hands, but a builder. A mender of what others threw away. A woman with a name that she had forged herself, in the quiet heat of resilience and the steady light of her grandfather's belief. It started in the small, rented garage we finally managed to afford. Silas and I, working side by side, developed a prototype for a new kind of product. It was born from our neighbors' needs, simple, beautifully crafted, and intuitive assistive devices for the elderly. Our first design was an elegant wooden handle that could be attached to any drawer or cabinet, designed for hands stiff with arthritis. Then came a walker with a built-in, vibration-dampening tray and a simple, one-touch emergency call button housed in a smooth, warm piece of polished cherry wood. We called our nascent company Hearthwood Innovations. Hearth for the home and warmth we provided, wood for the craft that was its soul. We pitched our designs to a local elder care clinic. They were captivated not just by the functionality, but by the dignity and beauty of the objects themselves. We received a small community development grant, then another. We hired 2 interns from my tech program, bright-eyed young people who believed in our mission enough to work for coffee and the promise of creating something meaningful. By year 5, Hearthwood Innovations was a registered LLC. By year 6, we had contracts with 3 major assisted living facilities in the state. And by year 7, our devices were in the homes of over 10,000 senior citizens, making their lives a little easier, a little safer, a little more beautiful. Silas became our chief advisor, our quality control expert, and our most enthusiastic product tester. He'd shuffle around our workshop, offering quiet suggestions on the grain of a piece of oak or the satisfying click of a button. But more than anything, he was my anchor. Through every late night spent staring at design schematics, every stressful negotiation with suppliers, every moment of doubt, he was there. His presence was a quiet, constant reassurance. Success is meaningless, Serafina, he told me once, looking up from a blueprint, if it makes you forget the person you were when you had nothing. The Port Blossom Chronicle ran a story on us one winter. The headline was splashy, from hospital kitchen to CEO, the woman who built a future from a broken past. I didn't send a copy to my mother. I didn't have to. The story rippled through the small-town networks, passed from extended cousins to old family friends, eventually landing on the very doorsteps of the people who had once told me I was wasting my life on a dying man. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I ignored the carefully casual email from my cousin Gregory that began, "Hey, long time no see. Read about your company, super impressive." I knew what they didn't. My name wasn't built on their approval. It was built on every night I didn't quit, every bill I scraped together the money to pay, every quiet word of encouragement Silas had given me when I thought I couldn't go on. He was 91 when his health began to fail again. This time, it was a slower, gentler decline. There was no crisis, no frantic rush to the hospital. He still drank his morning tea, still gave me his thoughts on new product designs, still smiled that warm, familiar smile when I walked into the room. But we both knew. We both felt the tide beginning to recede. This time, he wasn't going to recover. And for the first time in 7 years, I was the one who felt the desperate urge to hold on, to bargain with time. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The light outside was soft and pearlescent, as if the world understood it needed to be gentle. I found him in his favorite armchair by the window, the one he called his thinking spot. A closed book rested in his lap, a half-full cup of tea had gone cold on the table beside him, and a faint, peaceful smile graced his lips. There were no machines, no alarms, no chaos. Just peace. I sat on the floor beside his chair and held his hand, which was still warm, for a long time before I could bring myself to make the necessary calls. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wasn't ready to live in a world that no longer held the sound of his voice. The funeral was small, just as he would have wanted. No ostentatious flower arrangements, no grand eulogies. Just our neighbors, a few colleagues from the early days of Hearthwood, and the kind-eyed nurse from the hospital who once told me he was the most gracious patient she'd ever cared for. I was standing at the edge of the quiet churchyard, thanking people as they departed, when I heard the distinct, sharp sound of expensive heels on the gravel path. I turned and my breath caught in my throat. There they were. My mother, Margaret, in a severe black dress. My Uncle Richard, his face a mask of solemnity that didn't quite reach his eyes. His wife and my cousin Gregory, dressed in a sleek suit, looking more like he was attending a stockholder meeting than a funeral. They surveyed the small, humble gathering as if they were tourists observing a quaint local custom. My mother opened her arms, a pantomime of maternal warmth, as if 7 years of silence could be erased with a single gesture. "Serafina, sweetheart. You've grown into such a woman." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stood rooted to the spot, a pillar of ice. She tried again, her smile faltering slightly. "I know things got messy back then. But we're still family. And your grandfather, he would have wanted us all to be together for this." A wild, hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up inside me. I wanted to scream, to ask her if she remembered leaving me in that fluorescent-lit hallway like a piece of discarded trash. But I choked it down. All I did was nod curtly toward the small, stone chapel. "He's inside. You have 5 minutes." Later, after the service, as I was quietly gathering the leftover programs, my mother approached me again. This time, her expression was one I remembered well from childhood, a tight, polished smile that never reached her eyes, a prelude to a request. So, she began, her tone light and airy, about the estate. "We assume there's a will. Your grandfather was never a careless man." I finally met her gaze, my own eyes flat and empty of the emotion she expected. "There is," I said. Her smile widened, predatory and assured. Wonderful. We'll need to get together with the lawyer to discuss how everything will be divided. That was when I finally found my voice. My real voice. You left him to die in a hospital bed, Margaret, I said, the name feeling foreign and formal on my tongue. You didn't call. You didn't visit. You didn't once, in 7 years, ask if he was even alive. You are only here now because you think his death has made him valuable. She blinked, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes before the mask of indignation slammed back into place. Don't be so dramatic. You may be his granddaughter, but we are his children. He wouldn't cut us out. I looked down at the thick manila envelope in my hands. It contained his will, sealed, notarized, and already in the care of his longtime attorney. You'll find out tomorrow, I said quietly. But I can tell you this. He wasn't nearly as forgiving as I am. The next morning, I arrived at the law office of Foster and Thorne 15 minutes early. I wasn't nervous. I felt a strange, profound calm, as if I had been rehearsing for this moment for 7 years. Mr. Foster, Silas's attorney, was a kind, silver-haired man who had helped us file the initial paperwork for Hearthwood Innovations. He greeted me with a soft, sympathetic smile and led me to a conference room that smelled of old leather and polished mahogany. I took a seat at the head of the long, imposing table. In front of me sat a sealed envelope and a small, intricately carved wooden box, the one Silas had given me a month ago with the instruction not to open it until this very meeting. Minutes later, they arrived. My mother swept in, her heels clicking an imperious rhythm on the marble floor. My Uncle Richard followed, his face already tight with avarice. My cousin Gregory slouched into a chair across from me, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were already mentally spending a share. No one said hello. Mr. Foster cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. We are gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Silas Elias Rowe, dated, notarized, and confirmed on his 90th birthday. He paused, his gaze resting on me. Miss Rowe, your grandfather requested you open the box now. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was Silas's old silver pocket watch, the one he wound every morning at precisely 7 o'clock. Tucked beneath it was a small, unmarked USB flash drive and a single, folded piece of paper. I slid the drive across the polished table to Mr. Foster. He plugged it into a laptop connected to a large monitor on the wall. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly, the room was filled with my grandfather's face. He looked older, more frail than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and his voice, when he spoke, was the same steady, gentle baritone I knew so well. If you are hearing this, he began, it means I have finally gone to see what's on the other side of the hill. And if the people I suspect are in this room with Serafina are actually here, well, I can't say I'm surprised. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Gregory stared at the ceiling. Let me make this simple. Silas's voice continued, calm and resolute. I, Silas Elias Rowe, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including all shares of Hearthwood Innovations, all real estate assets, all personal accounts, and all intellectual property, to my granddaughter, Serafina Marie Rowe. Everything. My uncle's jaw dropped. My mother leaned forward, her face a mask of fury. This is outrageous. It's not legal. He was clearly manipulated. She was with him every day. Who knows what lies she fed him to turn him against his own family. Mr. Foster held up a hand, forestalling the tirade. He slid a notarized document across the table. Mr. Rowe completed a full cognitive evaluation with a board-certified neurologist 2 weeks prior to recording this video. He was found to be of full mental capacity. There was no evidence of coercion. The will is ironclad. My cousin Gregory shot to his feet. You've got to be kidding me. She was a dishwasher. She lived off him for years. As if on cue, Silas's image on the screen smiled a sad, knowing smile. To those of you who will claim she took from me, I say this, she gave me 7 more years. 7 years of morning sun and hot tea. 7 years of laughter and purpose. She gave me a reason to mend myself. You gave me silence. You left me in a hospital because my life became an inconvenience. She stayed and built something from the rubble you left behind. Not just a company. A life. My mother's face went pale. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a stark, hollow look. Mr. Foster folded the will with a crisp, final motion. There are no alternate beneficiaries. A no-contest clause is included. Any legal challenge to this will immediately forfeit any and all claim, however spurious. Mr. Rowe's wishes are absolute. Serafina Rowe is the sole heir. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the crushing sound of entitlement turning to dust. One by one, they rose to leave. As my mother passed me, she stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. In her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before directed at me, fear. But I didn't flinch. I met her gaze, and for the first time, I felt no anger, no pain, just a quiet, unshakable certainty. I was no longer the girl they had abandoned. I was the woman he had chosen. They did not leave quietly. The moment the heavy doors of the law office closed behind us, my mother whirled on me, her voice a low, venomous hiss. You think this makes you better than us? Scheming like that? You preyed on a sick old man and tricked him into signing away his legacy. I looked at her, at this woman whose face was a stranger's to me now, twisted by a greed so naked it was pitiful. You left him, I said, my voice steady and calm. You left both of us. For 7 years, you didn't exist. Now you're angry not because you lost a father, but because you lost a lottery ticket you thought you were holding. Uncle Richard stepped forward, his posture aggressive. We are his children, Serafina. That's a biological fact you can't erase. And what did that title mean to you? I asked, turning to him. A bond? A responsibility? Or just a birthright you assumed came with a payout? He clenched his fists, speechless. We'll contest the will, Gregory snapped, recovering his bravado. We'll go to the press. We'll tell everyone how you took advantage of a dying man with dementia. A small, weary smile touched my lips. I had prepared for this. Go ahead, I said, my voice soft but unwavering. Please do. And when you do, I will release the full, unedited video of Grandpa's testimony. Along with his daily journals from the past 7 years, his medical evaluations, and the handwritten letters he wrote, but never sent, to each of you, detailing exactly how you made him feel the day you walked away. Let's let the world decide who the victim was. The color drained from their faces. They were silent. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my bag and pulled out one last item. It was the folded piece of paper from the wooden box. I held it out to my mother. He wrote this for you. All of you. It's not a legal document. It's personal. Her hand trembled as she took it from me. She unfolded it. There, in Silas's familiar, elegant script, were just 3 words. You walked away. She crushed the note in her fist, as if the pressure of her hand could somehow erase the truth of the words. For the first time, she was utterly silent. No curse, no threat, no justification. That silence was her confession. I turned to leave, pausing at the heavy glass doors that led out into the bright afternoon sun. You lost an inheritance today, I said, not looking back at them. But the truth is, you lost him a long, long time ago. I didn't take anything from you. You gave it all away, the day you decided that love was too inconvenient. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the light. And for the first time in my life, standing under their collective gaze, I did not feel small. I felt whole. Not because I had won some bitter contest, but because I had survived. Because I had stayed. Because I had built something beautiful and strong from the ashes they had left behind. And because, in the end, he had chosen me not with his money, but with his time, his trust, and the quiet, unyielding love of a man who saw inestimable value in the very person they had so easily discarded. 6 months later, the little house felt quieter, but it was no longer a silence of absence. It was a silence of peace. I kept the armchair by the window, the kettle that whistled his favorite tune, and the silver pocket watch, which I wound every morning at 7, a small, sacred ritual connecting me to him. But my life was not about mourning, it was about building. Using a portion of the inheritance, I launched the Silas Rowe Foundation. The name was a tribute not just to him, but to his philosophy, to mend, to nurture, to see potential where others saw only flaws. Its mission was simple: to provide technical training, mentorship, and emotional support to young people and elderly individuals who, for whatever reason, had been left behind. We started small, in a rented room at the back of the Port Blossom Community Center, with 3 used laptops and a collection of folding tables. But the day our first student, a teenager who had aged out of the foster care system, successfully built her own simple assistive device and shouted, "It actually works," a jolt of pure joy shot through me. That spark, that triumphant light in her eyes, that was Silas's legacy living on. A year later, we opened our first permanent workshop. 5 years after that, one of our first scholarship recipients was hired as a lead developer at Hearthwood Innovations. When she invited me to her graduation ceremony, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I never really had a family. Your foundation, it was the first place that ever made me feel like I mattered." I pressed Silas's favorite wrench into her hand, the one he always said could fix more than just machines. "You do matter," I told her. "And don't you ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I still live in the same small city by the sea. Hearthwood is a much bigger company now, but my life remains simple. There are no mansions, no flashy cars, just purpose, peace, and the ever-present sound of the gulls over Port Blossom. I learned long ago what true wealth is. It's the 7 extra years I got with him. It's the quiet pride in the lives I've been able to help repair. It's the memory of the girl I was and the quiet strength of the woman I became, all because I chose to stay. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that day in the hospital, about the crushing weight of being abandoned. And then I look at everything that grew from that single, painful moment. Not bitterness, but belonging. Not revenge, but restoration. Not an inheritance, but a legacy. Tonight, I'll win the pocket watch again. The rhythmic ticking will fill the quiet house, a steady heartbeat in the dark. And I know that one day, when I find someone else who needs to be reminded of their own worth, I will pass it on. Not because it's valuable, but because of the story it carries. And I will say to them what he once said to me.